Welcome to another exploration into the darker corners of American history, stories that remain as mysterious as they are unsettling. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. It's always intriguing to see how far these accounts travel and when they find their audience. With that said, let's journey back into the past. In the summer of 1873, deep in the shadowed hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, a 14-year-old girl named Amelia Allen made a declaration that would chill the bones of everyone who heard it. Standing beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak tree near the one-room schoolhouse in West Plains, she turned to her classmates with eyes that seemed to hold secrets far beyond her years. "I've seen my own death," she whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly certainty that made the other children step back in fear. "I know the day it will come, and I know exactly how it will look." What followed was a prophecy so precise, so unnervingly detailed, that when it came to pass exactly as she had described, it left an entire community questioning the very nature of life, death, and the mysterious forces that govern our existence. This is the story of Amelia Allen, a tale that has been deliberately buried in the dusty archives of Missouri history, perhaps because the truth it reveals is too disturbing for us to accept. The Missouri Ozarks of 1873 were a land caught between worlds, where the ancient superstitions of the mountains collided with the harsh realities of post-Civil War America. The war had ended 8 years earlier, but its scars still marked the landscape like open wounds. Communities scattered throughout Howell County were slowly rebuilding, but the process was fraught with hardship, isolation, and an ever-present sense that darker forces were at work in the shadows. West Plains, where the Allen family made their home, was little more than a collection of wooden buildings connected by muddy roads that turned treacherous with every rainfall. The town's population barely reached 500 souls, most of them farmers, merchants, and laborers, trying to carve out a living from the unforgiving Ozark soil. Communication with the outside world was sporadic at best, with mail arriving perhaps once a week, if the weather permitted, and the roads were passable. In this isolated environment, old beliefs flourished like wildflowers after a spring rain. The people of the Ozarks had always been suspicious of forces beyond their understanding, and the trauma of the Civil War had only deepened their reliance on folk wisdom, omens, and supernatural explanations for the inexplicable events that seemed to plague their daily lives. Stories of second sight, prophetic dreams, and ghostly visitations were shared around kitchen tables and whispered in church pews, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. It was into this world of mystery and uncertainty that Amelia Allen was born in 1859, the third child of George and Martha Allen. Her father was a man weathered by years of hard labor, his hands permanently stained with the red clay of the Ozark soil. He had served briefly in the Union Army, returning home with a slight limp and a haunted look in his eyes that never quite faded, even years after the war's end. George was a practical man who believed in the power of hard work and divine providence, but he was not immune to the superstitions that permeated his community. Martha Allen was a woman of quiet strength, her face prematurely aged by the demands of frontier life, but her spirit unbroken by the countless hardships she had endured. She possessed what the local people called the knowing, an intuitive understanding of herbs, healing, and the subtle signs that nature provided to those wise enough to read them. It was from her mother that Amelia inherited the gift that would both define and ultimately destroy her short life. From an early age, Amelia was different from other children in ways that made her neighbors uncomfortable. She spoke little, preferring to spend her time wandering the wooded hills around her family's small farm, collecting unusual stones and dried flowers that she arranged in mysterious patterns on her bedroom windowsill. Her eyes, a startling shade of green that seemed to change color depending on the light, had a way of looking through people rather than at them, as if she could see something hidden just beyond the surface of the visible world. The first sign of Amelia's unusual abilities manifested when she was 7 years old. She had awakened one morning in tears, claiming that she had dreamed of their neighbor's cow dying in the creek. Her mother initially dismissed it as a child's nightmare, but later that same day, the cow was found drowned in the very spot Amelia had described. The incident might have been dismissed as coincidence, but it was only the beginning of a pattern that would continue throughout her childhood. Over the years, Amelia's dreams proved unnervingly accurate with disturbing frequency. She predicted the birth of her baby brother 2 months before her mother even knew she was pregnant, describing not only the timing but also the child's distinctive birthmark. She foresaw the Great Fire that would destroy the Methodist Church in 1871, providing details about the time of day and the direction of the wind that would prove devastatingly accurate. Most unsettling of all, she seemed to know when death was approaching long before anyone else could sense it coming. The elderly widow, Mrs. Henderson, was the first person Amelia warned about their impending death. She approached the old woman after Sunday service one autumn morning in 1872, her young face grave with concern. "You need to make peace with your sister in Springfield," she told Mrs. Henderson with the solemnity of someone far beyond her years. "You don't have much time left." Mrs. Henderson died peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later, but not before writing the letter to her estranged sister that Amelia had urged her to send. By the time Amelia reached her 14th birthday in the spring of 1873, her reputation as someone touched by supernatural forces had spread throughout the community. Some viewed her with reverence, believing she had been blessed with divine insight. Others regarded her with suspicion and fear, whispering that no good could come from a child who seemed to have one foot in the world of the living and another in the realm of the dead. The division in opinion would prove prophetic in ways no one could have imagined. It was on a sultry Tuesday morning in late June that Amelia made the declaration that would seal her fate. The summer of 1873 had been particularly oppressive, with temperatures soaring well above normal and humidity that made every breath feel like drowning in thick, warm molasses. The children of West Plains had sought refuge beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree that stood beside their schoolhouse, its ancient trunk scarred by decades of initials carved by young hands, and its roots running deep into the Missouri soil. Amelia had been quieter than usual that morning, sitting apart from the other children with her arms wrapped around her knees and her gaze fixed on something far beyond the horizon. When her closest friend, Sarah Beth Coleman, asked if she was feeling well, Amelia turned with those penetrating green yes, and spoke the words that would haunt the community for generations to come. "I had the dream again last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the still air. "But this time, it was different. This time, it was about me." The other children gathered closer, drawn by the same morbid fascination that had always surrounded Amelia's pronouncements. They had learned to take her visions seriously, having witnessed too many of them come to pass, to dismiss them as childish fantasy. "I saw myself lying in a coffin," Amelia continued, her voice taking on the distant quality it always possessed when she spoke of her dreams. "I was wearing a white dress, one I've never seen before, with tiny pearl buttons running up the front and lace around the collar and sleeves. My hair was braided with white ribbons, and my hands were folded over a bouquet of wild roses and baby's breath." She paused, her eyes focusing on something none of the other children could see. The coffin was made of pine wood, stained dark but simple, with brass handles that caught the candlelight. There were people all around, more people than I've ever seen in one place in West Plains. They were singing Amazing Grace, but their voices sounded far away, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. Sarah Beth shivered despite the heat. "When?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "August 15th, Amelia replied without hesitation. "A Friday, just before sunset, when the light turns golden and the shadows grow long. That's when it will happen." The specificity of the vision sent a chill through the assembled children that had nothing to do with the weather. Amelia's previous predictions had always been somewhat vague about timing, but this one was different. This one carried the weight of absolute certainty, as if she were describing something that had already occurred rather than something yet to come. Word of Amelia's prophecy spread through West Plains like wildfire in dry grass. By evening, there wasn't a household in town that hadn't heard some version of the story. The details grew more elaborate with each telling, but the core remained consistent. The Allen girl had seen her own death, and she claimed it would occur on August 15th, just 7 weeks away. The reaction in the community was swift and divided. Those who had always believed in Amelia's gift saw the prophecy as a tragic but undeniable truth that must be accepted with resignation and faith. They began preparing for the inevitable, some even offering to help Martha Allen sew the white dress that Amelia had described in such vivid detail. But there were others who viewed the prophecy with suspicion and anger. Led by Reverend Elijah Boone, a traveling preacher who had arrived in West Plains just days before Amelia's declaration, a faction of the community began to whisper that the girl was not blessed with divine sight, but cursed with something far more sinister. Reverend Boone was a tall, gaunt man with piercing black eyes and a voice that could fill a church without effort. He had come to the Ozarks from somewhere back east, claiming to have been called by God to minister to the isolated communities of the frontier. His sermons were fire and brimstone affairs that left his congregations both terrified and exhilarated, and he possessed a charisma that drew followers like moths to a flame. The Sunday after Amelia's prophecy, Reverend Boone chose it as the subject of his sermon. Standing behind the crude wooden pulpit of the Methodist Church, he pointed an accusing finger toward the section where the Allen family sat and declared that no godly child could possess such knowledge of death and darkness. "The devil himself has taken residence in that girl," he thundered, his voice echoing off the rough-hewn walls. "She speaks not with the voice of divine prophecy, but with the forked tongue of Satan himself. Her visions are not gifts from the Almighty, but snares set by the Prince of Darkness to drag this entire community into the pit of despair." His words found fertile ground in the fears and superstitions of his listeners. By the time the service ended, a significant portion of the congregation had been convinced that Amelia Allen represented a genuine threat to the spiritual well-being of their community. Some demanded that she be taken to Springfield for examination by doctors who might be able to determine the source of her affliction. Others suggested more extreme measures, whispering about exorcism and the need to cast out the evil spirits that had supposedly taken up residence in the young girl's soul. George and Martha Allen found themselves increasingly isolated as the weeks passed. Neighbors who had once sought out Martha's herbal remedies now crossed the street to avoid her. Children who had played with Amelia were forbidden from associating with her. The family's small farm, which had never been prosperous, began to suffer as suppliers refused to extend credit and buyers looked elsewhere for their produce. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the change that came over Amelia herself. As August 15th drew closer, she seemed to grow more ethereal. as if she were already beginning to fade from the world of the living. She ate less, spoke even more rarely than before, and spent long hours sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the rolling hills of the Ozarks with eyes that seemed to be seeing something far beyond the physical landscape. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the only physician within 50 miles of West Plains, examined Amelia twice during those final weeks of July. Both times he pronounced her physically healthy, though he admitted to being troubled by her listless demeanor and the strange, distant quality of her gaze. He recommended that the family take her to Springfield for consultation with specialists, but the journey would have been expensive and difficult, and besides, Amelia herself refused to go. It wouldn't matter, she told her parents with the matter-of-fact acceptance that had characterized all her pronouncements about death. What's coming can't be changed. I've seen it too clearly, and it's already written in whatever book keeps track of such things. As the first week of August passed, the tension in West Plains became almost unbearable. Those who believed in Amelia's prophecy watched her with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination, while those who dismissed it as either madness or devilry waited for August 15th to pass uneventfully, vindicate their skepticism. The division had grown so severe that families stopped speaking to each other, old friendships dissolved, and the very fabric of the community began to unravel. It was during this period of heightened anxiety that strange incidents began occurring throughout the town. Mrs. Sarah Coleman, Sarah Beth's mother, reported that all the mirrors in her house had cracked simultaneously during the night of August 8th, though there had been no earthquake or other disturbance to cause such damage. The blacksmith, Jonas Wheeler, claimed that his tools had mysteriously rearranged themselves in his shop, forming patterns that reminded him uncomfortably of the flower arrangements Amelia had always created as a child. Most unsettling of all were the reports of Amelia being seen in places where she couldn't possibly have been. Multiple witnesses swore they had observed her walking through the cemetery at midnight, dressed in white. Others claimed to have seen her standing at the edge of the woods that surrounded the town, motionless and staring, before disappearing like mist when approached. When questioned, Amelia insisted she had been home in bed during all these alleged sightings, but her parents admitted they couldn't be certain, as they had taken to giving her laudanum to help her sleep. The mystery deepened when the local seamstress, Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, came forward with a story that chilled everyone who heard it. She claimed that on the night of August 10th, she had been awakened by a gentle knocking at her door. When she opened it, she found Amelia standing on her porch, holding a piece of white fabric and a paper with detailed measurements, written in a child's careful handwriting. She asked me to make her a dress, Mrs. Harper reported to anyone who would listen. Said it needed to be finished by August 14th, and it had to match exactly what was written on the paper. The measurements, the style, even the placement of the buttons and lace. Everything was specified down to the tiniest detail. What made the story even more disturbing was that the description perfectly matched what Amelia had told her classmates she would be wearing in her coffin. Mrs. Harper, despite her growing unease, had agreed to make the dress, partly out of curiosity and partly because she feared what might happen if she refused. August 15th dawned clear and hot, with not a cloud in the sky to offer relief from the blazing sun. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, and the air shimmered with heat waves that made the distant hills dance like mirages. Despite the oppressive weather, crowds began gathering in the center of West Plains, drawn by a combination of morbid curiosity and genuine concern for the Allen family. Amelia had awakened that morning with an unusual sense of peace. For the first set time in weeks, she seemed more present, more connected to the world around her. She spoke more than she had in days, asking her mother to braid her hair with white ribbons and requesting that the dress Mrs. Harper had made be laid out on her bed. "I want to see it," she told Martha, her voice carrying a strange mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I want to make sure everything is exactly as it should be." The dress was everything Amelia had envisioned. Made from fine white cotton with tiny pearl buttons running up the front and delicate lace trim around the collar and sleeves, it was far more elaborate than anything the Allen family could normally have afforded. Mrs. Harper had worked tirelessly to complete it, later admitting that she had felt compelled to make it perfect, as if some unseen force was guiding her hands. As the afternoon wore on, Amelia remained calm and apparently healthy, leading some in the community to hope that her prophecy had been nothing more than the product of a troubled imagination. But as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting the long shadows that Amelia had described, a change came over her that was visible to everyone present. She had been sitting on the front porch of her family's home, quietly watching the people who had gathered in the yard and along the road. Suddenly, at approximately 5 o'clock, she stood up with a sharp intake of breath, her hand pressed to her chest and her face pale as parchment. "It's starting," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I can feel it beginning, just like in the dream." Dr. Morrison, who had been present since early afternoon, rushed to examine her, but could find no obvious cause for her distress. Her pulse was rapid but not dangerously so. Her breathing was slightly labored but not severely impaired, and her temperature was normal. The color continued to drain from her face, and her eyes took on the glassy quality that people associate with serious illness. Within an hour, Amelia's condition had deteriorated dramatically. She complained of severe chest pains and difficulty breathing, though Dr. Morrison could detect no signs of pneumonia, heart disease, or any other ailment that might explain her symptoms. Most disturbing of all, she seemed to be aging before their eyes, her youthful features taking on a drawn, ethereal quality that made her look far older than her 14 years. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, exactly as Amelia had predicted, she asked to be dressed in the white gown and carried to her bed. Her parents, now too frightened and grief-stricken to question her requests, complied with shaking hands. Martha Allen braided her daughter's hair with white ribbons, while George Allen gathered wildflowers from their garden, creating the bouquet of wild roses and baby's breath that Amelia had described in her vision. The final hour of Amelia's life unfolded with the inexorable precision of a carefully orchestrated performance. As the golden light of sunset filtered through her bedroom window, she lay in her bed, wearing the white dress, her hands folded over the bouquet, looking exactly as she had described herself appearing in the coffin. The room filled with neighbors and family members, more people than had ever gathered in the small Allen home, and someone began singing "Amazing Grace" in a voice that seemed to come from far away. Amelia's last words, spoken just as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, were perhaps the most chilling of all. Looking directly at her mother with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, she whispered, "It's exactly as I saw it. Everything is exactly as it was meant to be." She closed her eyes with what appeared to be relief and passed away so peacefully that several witnesses later swore they had seen her spirit leave her sky, rising like a pale mist toward the ceiling before disappearing altogether. The cause of Amelia Allen's death remains a mystery that medical science has never satisfactorily explained. Dr. Morrison, despite conducting a thorough examination, could find no evidence of disease, injury, or poisoning that might account for her sudden demise. His official report listed the cause of death as unknown natural causes, though he privately admitted to colleagues in Springfield that he had never encountered anything like it in his 30 years of medical practice. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it matched Amelia's prophecy in every detail. She was laid to rest in a simple pine coffin stained dark brown, exactly as she had described. The brass handles caught the candlelight just as she had foretold, and the mourners, numbering more than 200 people from throughout Howell County, sang Amazing Grace with voices that seemed to echo from some distant, otherworldly place. Even more unsettling was the realization that many of the details Amelia had described could not have been known to her in advance. The specific type of wood used for the coffin had been selected by the undertaker based on availability and cost, factors that would have been impossible for her to predict. The decision to sing Amazing Grace had been made spontaneously by one of the mourners, without any prior planning or discussion. The number of people who attended far exceeded what anyone would have expected for a farm family of modest means. Yet somehow, Amelia had seen it all with perfect clarity, down to the smallest details that no amount of planning or suggestion could have orchestrated. In the weeks and months following the funeral, various theories emerged to explain what had happened to Amelia Allen. Medical experts who reviewed Dr. Morrison's notes suggested possibilities ranging from an undetected heart defect to some form of psychological condition that had manifested as physical illness. The phenomenon of self-fulfilling prophecy was discussed at length, with some arguing that Amelia had unconsciously willed herself to die on the predicted date. Reverend Boone, not surprisingly, maintained that supernatural forces had been at work, though he stopped short of claiming vindication for his earlier accusations of demonic possession. Other religious leaders in the region offered different interpretations, some suggesting that Amelia had been blessed with genuine prophetic gifts, while others argued that her death had been a divine test of the community's faith. But perhaps the most compelling theory came from Dr. Harold Whitman, a physician and researcher from St. Louis who had made a study of similar cases throughout the American frontier. Dr. Whitman had documented dozens of instances in which individuals, particularly young women, had accurately predicted their own deaths with startling precision. While he couldn't explain the mechanism behind such premonitions, he argued that they represented a genuine phenomenon that deserved serious scientific investigation rather than dismissal as superstition or coincidence. Dr. Whitman's research revealed that death premonitions had been reported throughout human history, appearing in the folklore and medical records of cultures around the world. The American frontier, with its isolation, hardship, and proximity to death, seemed to produce an unusually high number of such cases. He theorized that certain individuals might possess a heightened sensitivity to biological processes that normally occurred below the threshold of conscious awareness, allowing them to detect the approach of death long before conventional medical examination could reveal any symptoms. The case of Amelia Allen, however, stood out even among Dr. Whitman's extensive collection of similar incidents. The precision of her prophecy, the specific details that proved accurate, and the apparently perfect health she maintained until the predicted day all combined to make her story unique in the annals of unexplained phenomena. Local newspapers of the period covered the story with varying degrees of skepticism and sensationalism. The Springfield Leader ran a brief article describing the events as a tragic case of adolescent hysteria that led to an unfortunate death, while the Missouri State Democrat took a more sensational approach, dubbing Amelia the Prophet of the Ozarks and speculating about the supernatural forces that might have been at work. But perhaps more significant than the newspaper coverage was the profound impact Amelia's death had on the community of West Plains and the surrounding region. The division that had torn the town apart during her final weeks only deepened after her death, with some residents leaving altogether rather than continue living in a place they now associated with dark and inexplicable forces. Parents throughout the Ozarks began warning their children against speaking of death or claiming to have prophetic dreams, fearing that such talk might somehow invite similar tragedies into their own families. The phrase, Tempting fate took on new significance in local parlance, and children who showed any signs of unusual sensitivity or psychic ability were often sent away to relatives in distant towns. Reverend Boone continued his ministry in the region for several more months, but his sermons took on an increasingly frantic quality as he struggled to explain how his accusations of demonic possession could be reconciled with Amelia's peaceful death and the genuine grief of her family. Eventually, he left the Ozarks altogether, claiming to have been called to minister in the Dakota Territory, though some whispered that he had been driven away by his own doubts about what he had witnessed. The Allen family never recovered from their daughter's death. George Allen's health declined rapidly in the months following the funeral, and he died the following spring of what Dr. Morrison diagnosed as a broken heart, though the medical terminology of the era was imprecise about such matters. Martha Allen lingered for several more years, but neighbors reported that she was never the same after losing first her daughter and then her husband. She was found dead in her garden in 1877, apparently having suffered a stroke while tending the wildflowers that Amelia had always loved. The Allen property was eventually sold to pay debts, and the new owners reported strange occurrences that drove them away within a year. Subsequent attempts to inhabit the house met with similar results, and by the 1880s, the building had been abandoned altogether. Local children dared each other to approach the ruins, but few were brave enough to actually set foot on the property, especially after sunset. Amelia's grave in the West Plains Cemetery became a site of pilgrimage for those who believed in her prophetic abilities. But it also attracted a more troubling element of curiosity seekers and those who hoped to commune with her spirit. Cemetery caretakers reported that flowers left on her grave would wither overnight, regardless of how fresh they had been when placed there, and that the ground above her coffin remained noticeably colder than the surrounding soil even during the hottest summer days. More disturbing were the reports from visitors who claimed to have seen Amelia's ghost walking among the headstones, always dressed in the white gown she had worn in death, and always carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. These sightings were most common around the anniversary of her death, but they occurred sporadically throughout the year, usually just before sunset when the light turned golden and the shadows grew long. By the turn of the century, Amelia Allen's story had become firmly embedded in the folklore of the Missouri Ozarks, but it had also begun to undergo the transformation that often befalls true events as they pass into legend. Details were embellished, new elements were added, and the historical facts became increasingly difficult to separate from the accumulated mythology. Some versions of the story claimed that Amelia had predicted not only her own death, but also the deaths of several other people in the community. Others suggested that she had left behind a written prophecy detailing future events that would befall West Plains and the surrounding region. A few particularly elaborate versions even claimed that she had been in communication with spirits of the dead throughout her childhood, serving as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm beyond. But perhaps the most significant change in how the story was remembered involved its gradual disappearance from official historical records. By the 1920s, references to Amelia Allen had been systematically removed from local histories, newspaper archives were purged of articles about her case, and even church records that had once documented her death were mysteriously lost or destroyed. This deliberate erasure of Amelia's story appears to have been the result of a coordinated effort by community leaders who felt that the tale reflected poorly on the region and hindered efforts to attract new residents and businesses to the area. The Ozarks were already struggling with a reputation for backwardness and superstition, and stories of prophetic young girls and unexplained deaths only reinforced negative stereotypes that local boosters were desperate to overcome. The campaign to erase Amelia Allen from history was largely successful. By the 1950s, few people in West Plains remembered her no. Me and those who did were often reluctant to discuss what they knew. The cemetery where she was buried underwent renovation in 1963, and her headstone was reportedly damaged beyond repair during the construction process, though some local residents suspected that its destruction had been intentional. Yet, despite these efforts to consign her story to oblivion, Amelia Allen's case continues to fascinate researchers and historians who specialize in unexplained phenomena. Modern investigators have uncovered fragments of evidence that corroborate many of the details of her story, including medical records, court documents, and personal letters that survived the historical purge. Dr. Emily Harrison, a folklorist from the University of Missouri who has spent years researching Amelia's case, believes that the story represents far more than simple frontier superstition. According to Dr. Harrison, the precision of Amelia's prophecy and the circumstances surrounding her death suggest the possibility of abilities that mainstream science has yet to understand or acknowledge. We're dealing with a well-documented case involving multiple witnesses, medical testimony, and physical evidence, Dr. Harrison explains. While we may not be able to explain how Amelia Allen knew the details of her own death, the historical record clearly indicates that she did possess this knowledge and that her predictions proved accurate in ways that cannot be easily dismissed as coincidence. Contemporary researchers have also noted parallels between Amelia's case and similar incidents reported in other parts of the world. The phenomenon of death premonitions has been documented in cultures ranging from the Scottish Highlands to the mountains of Tibet, suggesting that such abilities may represent a universal aspect of human consciousness rather than isolated instances of supernatural intervention. Recent advances in neuroscience and quantum physics have even provided potential frameworks for understanding how such premonitions might occur. Some researchers theorize that consciousness may be far more complex and interconnected than previously believed, potentially allowing some individuals to access information about future events through mechanisms that conventional science has yet to discover. But regardless of the scientific explanations that may eventually emerge, the story of Amelia Allen continues to raise profound questions about the nature of fate, free will, and the mysteries that surround the moment of death. Her case suggests that there may be aspects of human experience that transcend our current understanding of time, causality, and the relationship between mind and body. The deliberate suppression of her story also raises troubling questions about how societies choose to remember or forget events that challenge their fundamental assumptions about reality. The fact that an entire community worked to erase Amelia Allen from history suggests that her case represented something more than mere curiosity or entertainment. It posed a genuine threat to established ways of thinking about life and death. Today, more than 150 years after Amelia Allen's death, her story continues to haunt those who encounter it. The ruins of her family's farmhouse have long since been reclaimed by the Ozark wilderness, and the cemetery where she was buried has been developed into a shopping center, erasing even the physical traces of her existence. Yet her legacy endures in the whispered stories that pass between generations, in the persistent reports of unexplained phenomena in the region, and in the uncomfortable questions her case raises about the limits of human knowledge. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that Amelia Allen was not unique, that there have been others throughout history who possessed similar abilities, but whose stories were even more thoroughly suppressed, lost to the deliberate amnesia that societies impose when confronted with truths too frightening to acknowledge. The systematic destruction of records related to her case suggests a pattern of cover-up that may extend far beyond the borders of Missouri and far beyond the 19th century. As we continue to probe the mystery surrounding consciousness, death, and the nature of time itself, The case of Amelia Allen serves as a reminder that there are phenomena in this world that resist easy explanation or comfortable dismissal. Her story challenges us to consider the possibility that reality may be far stranger and more complex than our scientific worldview currently allows, and that the boundaries between life and death, present and future, may be far more permeable than we dare to imagine. In the end, Amelia Allen's greatest prophecy may have been not about her own death, but about the reaction her story would provoke. She seemed to understand that her case would be too disturbing for most people to accept, too threatening to established beliefs to be allowed to survive in the historical record. Perhaps she knew that her story would be deliberately buried, erased from memory like an uncomfortable truth that society chooses to forget. But truth has a way of persisting, even when it has been officially denied or forgotten. Somewhere in the shadowed hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, in the whispered conversations between those who still remember, in the unexplained phenomena that continue to perplex researchers and investigators, the story of Amelia Allen endures. It waits like a seed buried in dark soil, ready to sprout whenever someone is brave enough to dig deep enough to uncover it. And in that persistence, in that refusal to be completely erased, perhaps lies the most unsettling aspect of her case. For if Amelia Allen could see her own death with such perfect clarity, what else might she have seen? What other truths about the nature of existence, about the mysteries that surround us all, did she take with her to the grave? And how many other stories like hers have been buried so deeply that we may never recover them, leaving us to stumble blindly through a world far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to imagine? The case of Amelia Allen, the girl who saw her own death, remains one of the most compelling and disturbing mysteries in American history. It is a story that was meant to be forgotten, a truth that was deemed too dangerous to remember. But in the shadows of the Ozark Hills, where the boundary between the natural and supernatural has always been thin, her story continues to whisper its dark secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. This story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.